It's time to welcome our resident counselor, that is Simone Momplé. And today we are unpacking and taking a look at what we give, time to, what we give our efforts to, what we focus on that could lead to trauma, trigger trauma, and how to deal with trauma. Hello, Simone. How are you doing?
Hey Khanya, I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm absolutely fantastic, darling. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know that your life has become absolutely busy, but you're constantly making time for us. So we really appreciate that right here on Radio Bob, the station with the mind of its own, and more especially on the only date that matters. Simone, let's get into it. Something happens, it's traumatic. I just go on, I move on. The favorite word, I be strong. How do
Mm.
we first of all, identify that we've got some post traumatic disorder that we're dealing with?
Yes, I think that I want to just start off by saying that our talk today is going to be focusing more like on a preventative measure than a cure. But we can't deny the fact that then we've left things for too long, or something happens that we didn't expect, and we end up having this anxiety and sort of negative mental health issues and concerns that sometimes we don't even get proper diagnosis for. Sometimes we self-diagnose. Sometimes we just look at what everyone else is doing and we think that it's the same thing. So I think like what we need to understand is like it's the check-in process I know that we did a few weeks ago. It's understanding where we are, what is actually happening with me. Sometimes we are so far gone, I guess, to a point that we can't make these choices, or we can't understand ourselves completely. And this is where you need to reach out externally to to ask someone to help you to sort of understand where you are, if if there's a point that you cannot quite understand where it is that you are.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've moved into a space where now you're saying, okay, things are really overwhelming. And the way that if you don't know that you are actually moving towards an overwhelmment or any sort of negative space, I don't want to say like mental issues, but into a very negative space, which could lead to mental issues and PTSD type of things. If you need to think about what are you overloading yourself with, and how do you know that you're being overloaded? How do you know that you're not quite where you should be? And I think this is where we find ourselves jumping from one thing to another without landing anywhere. We're completely splitting our attention all the time. I know that us as women love to brag about multitasking. Ladies, it's really not a thing.
Wow.
Multitasking is only switching between tasks. So you cannot fully give your attention to even two things at once.
Well, I
You
mean,
cannot.
welcome to Lunch with Khanya. If you've just joined us, before I get lost in this conversation, it is Radio Bob, the station with a mind of its own, a wellness day, and we're in conversation with Simone Momplé, our resident counselor. Now, Simone, you're speaking about multitasking, okay? And I just want us to take a step back. That
Okay.
women brag about this. Is it not because, not so
Mm,
much that they want to brag about it, but societal pressure over decades and maybe even centuries has demanded that women multitask, right? And so and yet still they've proven that even in multitasking they can do things quite exceedingly well. Maybe sometimes it's not as excellent as those who don't have to multitask, but the need, if you're a working mom, you're working and you're a
mm,
mom, you know what I mean.
yes.
You can't separate the two. You don't stop being a mom just because you're at work, you know what I mean. And you
Yes.
don't stop
Yes.
being a working professional because you are now being a mom. That's just an example, especially
Yes.
around that we are still within the woman's month. But with that said, sometimes is it okay? Maybe let me ask it this way. Then is it okay, for one to shut down and do one thing at a time? Is it realistic? Is it actually realistic, or that in itself can cause some sort of traumas because things are being left behind, you're not catching up on things, because you only have 24 hours a day, and you need to be Simone the
Exactly.
friend, Simone the partner, Simone the employee, the
Mm.
boss, Simone the this, the that, and that. Is it realistic to expect that people just only give their attention to one thing and not multitask,
Mm.
particularly women?
Yeah, I think I want to say, I guess, two things here. The first one is, ladies, let's like stop the idea that it's a competition. I've been in many spaces where we as women are sitting in this competition, in a setting, and then we are saying to each other, I have to do this and this and this every day, and my weekends are filled with this. And the other one will say, I know that that's bad, but this is what I have to do. And I feel like it's not something we need to brag about, as you said. It's not something we brag about, because what are we trying to prove to who and why? We're only losing ourselves in the process. But what I want to say, the second thing is, and I think for me personally, Khanya, like this one hits home, hey, because I am also one to drive a lot of things at once. And I love to challenge myself and try something new. So I've been doing that over the years. I run with one thing and this is my vision and I want to achieve it. And I go for like my master's in dance psychology and I'm like, I'm going to do this thing and I run with it. So for years I've been doing it, and then people kept telling me to rest. No, you need to slow down. And I'm like, what do you mean? What does rest mean? And honestly, for me, most of the time, I thrive in it. I enjoy moving from one task to the other. It actually helps me to stay sane. That's where my wellness lies. But then I realized after a while I was losing myself in the process because it wasn't as much fun. And I think what happened was I wasn't doing it as consciously anymore. I think it's a conscious effort for you to move from one task to the other and understand still that you where you are grounded. I think the grounded is the word we should use there. That we understand, okay, I'm going to run to one thing to the other, but I'm going to land somewhere. I know that I'm moving. I know where I am in relation to everything, so that it's not going to become overwhelming to the point where you're forced to rest. So it's okay to consciously understand it, but there needs to be that switch off time to say, okay, at whatever time in the evening or whenever you fit it in. It can be a daily, a weekly, or a monthly thing where you check in and you see, okay, so for the next month, this is where my focus is going to lie, or the next day, or whatever it may be. And you consciously become aware of where your attention will go and what you're going to allow and what you are not going to allow to come into your space.
Yeah.
And when we have those boundaries as well, then we are very conscious about where we are at, and we can allow ourselves to experience fully what it is happening. And then, of course, when negative emotion does come up or something negative, the anxiety, we become conscious about it. Okay, we understand where it's coming from, why did that happen, and we can move from it.
That is the voice of Simone Momplé, our resident counselor, as we unpack what we focus on, how to detach ourselves from the things that are not adding value, as well as causing some sort of trauma and dealing with post-traumatic stress. It is 17 minutes past the hour, 2 o'clock. We'll be back right after this. I am in conversation with Simone Momplé, our resident counselor, and we're talking about what we give our energy to, and also post-traumatic stress disorder. Simone, welcome back, and I guess let's get into it, in terms of PTSD. I know that you were saying to me over the line during the break, the first thing that is important is that just don't self-diagnose.
Yes.
And to me that then brings the next question, because I think it's easier to be aware that you should look for professional help if something big has happened that is traumatic. So whether it's a loss of a loved one, a job loss, losing a relationship, a friendship, but some things are minor and people don't understand that too can lead to PTSD, whether it's having your phone stolen and you just think, we live in South Africa, this always happens, or you see something happen to someone else. It might not even be you, but I think sometimes, there's certain things that we have normalized that we don't realize contribute to how we react after the fact, and that we are in fact suffering from PTSD. Maybe let's
Yes,
start with
absolutely.
what it is.
Okay. So, PTSD is a post-traumatic stress disorder, which is an anxiety disorder. It is caused by very stressful or frightening and distressing events. So, yes, it is a disorder, which means, it's not something that is supposed to be happening. Disorder, if you break the words down, it's out of order, of our normal order. So, yes, PTSD would only be you'd only know that you have it if it's diagnosed by a clinical psychologist or psychiatrist, a specialist. So I strongly encourage people not to self-diagnose and say that I have PTSD until it has been proven, because sometimes it's not that bad. It's not that deep. It might just be at that moment, it was a shock to your system and your system needs to readjust. Now, there are preventative ways that you can handle something before you even actually experience something, even if it's going to be unexpected. I remember watching a talk show once where there were two people that they were interviewing about, both of them experienced the same thing. About 5 family members in their family have died like within a week, and they both experienced the same thing. But the one was handling it much better in terms of they knew they had to go through a mourning process and exactly what was going to happen, and they understood the process. When they got out of the mourning process, of course they were still experiencing the loss, but it didn't affect their life as much as the other one. So the other one developed more clinical depression and anxiety disorders and PTSD, and it affected the rest of their life a lot more. But when they were talking and they were explaining why that happened, was because the first person had a more understanding of themselves in a way in relation to everything that happens in their lives. So I would narrow it down to the fact that, do you know yourself well enough to know that when something small comes up for you, you actually address it when it comes up straight away. It says a small thing can become a big thing. And I want to also say that it's a process of, once you get to know yourself and you say, I know myself completely, I know exactly who I am, I know exactly what's happening with my life. At that moment, something will change and you need to adapt. So you never actually fully get to know who you really are, because you're always changing and adapting. But the question is, how well are you paying attention to what's changing and adapting? Because you are not the same person you were 5 years ago, even last week. There are things that have happened to you since then that were new. New experiences came up for you and you didn't know maybe quite how to handle it, or someone said something to you that was unexpected and you didn't have something like a tape that you pulled up. Oh, when someone says this to me, that's what I need to say back. We're not always ready for everything, but it's the awareness that we have towards these things that allow us to get to know ourselves better in the moment, to adapt and to change, because as we know, the only constant is change.
Yeah. If you've just joined us, welcome to Lunch with Khanya on the only station with a mind of its own. That's at Radio Bob. And of course, it's Wellness Day, and we are in conversation with Simone Momplé, our resident counselor. Now, Simone, you speak about something, and I think a lot of times people see this as a bad thing for some reason. Or it's not necessarily a bad thing, but they see it negatively when somebody says, oh, you've changed or whatever. I always take pride in that, because I think there's no way. The essence of me might stay the same, but if I'm the same person that you met on Monday, I think there's a bit of a challenge there. So a lot of people sometimes receive that kind of feedback, or don't receive that as feedback at all, in terms of change, and understand the need to respond to maybe even the exact same not incident, but the same sort of occurrence or activity, and respond differently to it. So somebody would say, last week, me bumping into, I don't know, a group of old friends from high school, and they say to me, oh, you've gained weight, meant nothing. It was funny. And yet today, the same thing happens and they felt some type of way. That sometimes people are harsher on themselves in terms of that, on why is this a different reaction? And, sometimes about being strong, you being silly or whatever, instead of realizing that something traumatic could have happened in that space, or something big has changed in that space, that this has now become a trigger.
Yes. And I think there are blind spots. I think we need to be honest with that. There are blind spots we are not privy to when it comes to ourselves as well. There's this concept of the Johari's window
Yes.
that people could Google and understand. So yes, we have some blind spots where we don't actually know what would trigger us, but sometimes it's something that has happened many years ago, and something that someone said or something you experienced, and then now all of a sudden maybe someone even close to you says it, and you don't understand why your reaction was the way it was. It doesn't mean that you have to go and dig and understand why it happened and go back many years. Let's just be here and understand what can I do about it. So that happened. I felt this type of way. Let me understand why and how I can change it for myself now in the future. That's bringing yourself to the present moment and understanding you working from a preventative way and not going back into your past and having sort of a cure perspective. I need to go and cure whatever happened to me in the past. No, we're going to work from where we are, and we're going to walk forward, and we're going to see how can I prevent this in future, because every day we start on a clean slate. We don't have to pick up the things from yesterday.
That is such a powerful thing, because I think in essence what you were trying to explain about PTSD is that it is because something from the past keeps reoccurring. So that line for me is quite powerful, that we mustn't always try to cure things, which means we keep on moving backwards because we're trying to find the source. Sometimes we need to move from here forward, because that way we get to prevent. But I mean, Simone, can you prevent something if you don't know where it started? So is that actually realistic?
Yeah, I think of course, it would depend on exactly what we're talking about. So, of course, I think we need to disclaim that the statements we are making is not a blanket statement for everything and every situation and for everyone. We're really trying to focus on a general thing. And honestly, this topic needs many more sessions. But yeah, I think that we can in a way prevent without knowing what we're preventing. We are sort of just preparing yourself to understand yourself, and here's where it comes in control. What can I control right now? I cannot control what's going to happen to me. I cannot control what happened in the past. And anyway, whether I'm thinking of the future or the past, I'm doing it now. So right now is where I'm at, and right now is the only thing I can control. I cannot be anxious about my future, even a meeting I'm going to have tomorrow morning. Right now, that doesn't help. It really hinders any sort of process in understanding where I am. So you say to yourself, okay, so I feel anxious about this thing that's coming up. What am I going to do about it? Nothing. I know that it's not airy-flairy in a way, but right now, maybe it's just something that you need to do is go get yourself a cup of coffee, just have some water, just write down your priorities and see where you are in life right now. Think about something that makes you feel good. One small thing that you can do to make yourself feel better. I think we also discussed that in a previous thing. And I know that we can, and I know that people can sit with me and often, argue to a certain extent that, no, there's so many things happening. Things are just stressful. My life is a mess. Life is hard. And I can say, yes, whatever you believe will be true. And I cannot change anybody's mind about that, and I'm not trying to. I'm saying that where you are is okay. If that's what you believe, that's also fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But my question is, how do you want to feel? And how do you sort of want your life to unfold from here on?
That is the voice of Simone Momplé, dropping gems as she does on a Wellness Day, right here on the only date that matters, Lunch with Khanya on Radio Bob, the station with a mind of its own. We're going to go to a song, and then we're going to be coming back to wrap things up on the Wellness Day. It's 33 minutes past the hour, 2 o'clock. My name is Khanya and Sosibo, here at your service to give you those beats of pleasure, simple, smooth, and saucy. So Simone, parting shot as we wrap up our Wellness Day feature today.
Absolutely. I think that the key things for me today is about not competing about who's worse off. In general, we need to stop that kind of conversation. We need to look at and be honest about where we are at, especially with ourselves. And I think taking the time for yourself is so essential for your optimal wellness. So whether you are working mom, as you mentioned, taking time for yourself is putting the oxygen mask on yourself first before anybody else, because if you are not breathing well, then no one else around you can do the same either. And then definitely working from that preventative measure versus cure. Yeah.
Yeah, and I like something that you said once we were off air about also just prioritizing. You don't have to do it all. If there's something that you can let go of it, so that you can be, you can give your optimal to what you need to deal with instead of spreading yourself thinly. Thank you so much again, Simone. Looking forward to our conversations again next week as we start a brand new month. Still have Simone on the line. Simone, almost forgot to ask you, how do we get a hold of you? I know that you've got a great sessions that you offer, which is a virtual session, Coffee with Simone. Tell us more.
Yeah, so Coffee with Simone is where we get to explore more about where we are at. And maybe there's something that we've discussed online with Khanya on her Wellness Wednesdays, and you'd like to unpack a little bit more in a little bit more personal way. Or you'd like to strategize about something that you'd like to do, start that YouTube channel, or whatever it may be, or you just need some level of motivation. Those Coffee with Simone sessions, you can find me anywhere. I'm on LinkedIn, Simone Momplé, as well as on Instagram, Simone the Dancer, and on YouTube as well, Simone Momplé, and that is where you'd also find our podcasts from these sessions.
Well, thank you once again, Simone Momplé, as we wrap up, of course, our Wellness Day right here on Lunch with Khanya.